A Total Experience, Modernist Landscapes from the Peer Arts Centre collection. Red Riza is a gentle way of introducing the concept of abstraction in landscape art. Betlow was a Glaswegian artist who, in later life, owned a home on Hoy, the largest of the outlying Orkney Islands. She became fascinated with the atmospherical conditions of her adopted home and experimented with depicting them in paint. Far from portraying the land as a constant feature, Lowe has used a deceptively simple method to express the forces that mould the very landscape of Orkney. On first glance, Red Riza appears a modest creation, relying on the undulating line and blocks of pure colour to portray the small island. Yet Lowe has captured powerful natural forces, such as air currents and seismic shifts, visible only by their effects on the landscape. The dark blue section curving over the green hints at the air currents and wind sweeping over the hills, while the earthy brown suggests the geological processes occurring under our feet. Lowe has portrayed a land that is living, breathing, and changing. Abstraction gave artists the opportunity to express more about a landscape than what is simply visible to the eye. A deeper understanding and connection can be expressed through experimentation with form and colour, leaving behind adherence to sight alone. William Geer was brought up in a mining community in Fife, and his family had worked in the coal pits for several generations. This instinctive experience of not only belonging to a place, but understanding its underlying structure, gives Geer an authenticity often missing from landscape art. Geer described his paintings as statements of kinship with the natural world, which suggests an emotional identification with the land. The artist's relationship with nature included intense observation of the minuscule structures that underpin the outworldly, visible world. While at art school in Edinburgh, Geer would scrutinise microscope slides of cellular structures or study the pavement to understand the crystalline geological forms hidden within. This careful study of the structure can be seen in the differing textures within the black forms and the careful layering of paint in the coloured sections within element. When asked to identify the most important component in his art, he replied, "Certainly structure." And the very title of element indicates the same interest in breaking down the visible world to its basic building blocks in order to better understand the whole. Peter Lanyon's Heather Coast is the depiction of moving at speed over a familiar landscape in a small, engineless glider, relying wholly on the forces of nature. The painting depicts not only what he saw, but the sensation of flying, the changing air torrents, and the sheer elation of the act. Apart from time in the Royal Air Force during World War II, Peter Lanyon spent the majority of his life in St Ives, where his family had lived for generations. This strong awareness of his own heritage gave Lanyon a feel of possession and curiosity over the Cornish landscape, and he aimed to portray a deeper sense of understanding and belonging. To this end, Lanyon would not only fly, but delve deep into the ancient tin mines, drive, cycle, and even stand on his head and do cartwheels in order to fully familiarise himself with various aspects of the land. Although these elements weren't necessarily seen when gliding, it was the knowledge that was important. Lanyon stated, "I want to show what I know and what I feel, not just what I see." In Linear Movement Orkney 3, Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham has reduced the ocean down to the most basic of lines. Yet the repetition and slight variations have retained the rhythm and the energy of the Arcadian Sea. For Barnes-Graham, drawing and painting was a method of investigating and understanding the changing structures and energies present in the land. Born in St Andrews and educated in Edinburgh, Barnes-Graham was based for the majority of her working life in St Ives, where she met and learnt from influential artists such as Ben Nicholson and Nam Gabo. This resulted in works that employed abstraction in order to encompass multiple readings or viewpoints of the same subject, ending in what she described as the total experience. Later in life, she divided her time between her homes in St Ives and St Andrews. She also spent a lot of time travelling and soaking up inspiration for her art. Barnes-Graham's experimental and adaptable outlook resulted in artworks that would change dramatically depending on the landscape examined, be it a Swiss glacier, an Orcadian wreck, or lava formations in Lanzarote. Due to his early career as a doctor in the Scilly Isles, the scientific impulse to understand by breaking down the landscape to the base components was found naturally in the art of John Wells. Having decided to give up his medical practice and focus on his art, Wells moved to St Ives, where he worked as a studio assistant for Barbara Hepworth and exhibited alongside Peter Lanyon and Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham. In Landscape Mineral, the dynamic shapes of each geological fragment reveals nature as a living and changing force, and the diversity of the materials that change our world. Wells has scraped back layers of paint to reveal both the structure in the application of paint on the cardboard and the geological substructures of the landscape. Despite being an adherent of abstraction, Barbara Hepworth's sculptures would often be rooted in place, either echoing shapes and forms or suggesting the emotional connection triggered by the landscape. She stated, "I cannot write anything about landscape without writing about the human figure and human spirit inhabiting the landscape. For me, the whole art of sculpture is the fusion of these two elements, the balance of sensation and evocation of man in this universe." While involute does not refer to a precise location, the undulating form of the sculpture echoes the nooks and crevices of a landscape shaped by centuries of wind and sea. Despite hailing from Yorkshire, Hepworth has come to be intimately associated with St Ives, and it is her deep understanding of and sympathy with the landscape that makes her sculptures reverberate. Terry Frost's engagement with landscape underwent a great upheaval when he moved from St Ives to the north of England upon being awarded the Gregory Fellowship in Painting at the University of Leeds. Frost was astonished by the drama of Yorkshire's landscape, and when comparing it to his time in St Ives remarked, "In those days I was a pretty important guy looking at nature. Now I feel space as a bloody big thing looking at titchy me." While his previous landscapes had focused on the harbours of coastal towns, Yorkshire offered a new visual experience. Frost described walking through the Yorkshire dales in winter and how the snowbound scene tricked his eyes into seeing the landscape without any depth. In red, black and white, Frost has exploited the flatness of the canvas, an attribute that traditional landscape art attempted to disguise, and imitated the visual trick of the snow. The black lines portray dry stone dikes sweeping into the distance and function as the only frame of reference in the scale of the landscape portrayed. The paring down of his colour spectrum to the bare minimal became an important theme in his subsequent art. How can one paint the warmth of the sun, the sound of the sea, or the journey of a beetle across a rock? John Wells' rhetorical question explains his use of abstraction by encapsulating his belief that landscape painting should go beyond the purely visual to encompass other sensory elements, such as sound, warmth, and the passage of time. Wells was strongly influenced by Naum Gabo's expression of the manipulation of exterior form by unseen interior forces. But rather than Gabo's purely geometrical exercises, Wells remained rooted in the landscape, as can see in both his paintings in this exhibition. The sweeping arcs of paint and the rhythm of shapes across the canvas signify the movement of forms that also offer a sense of time. The dynamic forms suggest the freedom of sails in a boat pulled taut by the wind, or the wings of a bird soaring ever higher over the sea. Alan Davey is one of the most distinctive artists of the 20th century. His otherworldly imagery draws on symbols from a wide range of global cultures and creates a universal and intuitive language of primal understanding. Born in Grangemouth and educated at Edinburgh College of Art, Davey belongs to a generation of Scottish artists alongside William Gere and Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, who revolutionised traditional depictions of the landscape. Davy's own interests, such as jazz music, Zen Buddhism, gliding and scuba diving, all inform his vision of a landscape that pulsates with meaning. Davy travelled around the world and investigated how disparate cultures have used similar symbols in their own visual languages. In Symbols in a Landscape, Davy goes beyond simple observation and portrays a timeless scene that suggests the innate presence of identity, culture, religion and history within the land. Yet Davy has not left out a human presence altogether. The buildings on the horizon line are present, yet appear fleeting and insignificant in comparison with the vibrant symbols. This implies the temporary nature of our own culture in comparison to the endurance of the land.